Hi, everyone. My name is Heather Somerville. I'm a reporter with the Wall Street Journal. I cover national security and technology. I've been a reporter for about 20 years. Most of that time, I've covered tech in some respects. So thanks for having me. We've got a really good panel. I'll let all these gentlemen introduce themselves as they each start to speak. So please remember to introduce yourself and talk a little bit about your background. But let's kind of set the table with the state of venture capital in defense. Last year, $50 billion in VC went into almost 1,000 deals globally in defense. Massive. It's gone up significantly every year for the last several years. So entrepreneurs are very excited about that. A lot of people are very excited about that. I want to take a minute to talk about what the potential cautions are for the amount of money coming into the space. Particularly, we heard about the $1.5 trillion resiliency fund from Jamie Dimon. That's not exclusively defense, but that's a lot of money. How has this amount of money changed the shape of the space? How has it changed the size or the difficulty in traversing the valley of death? And then what does it mean in terms of the risks of overcapitalization for a lot of these companies? So there's a lot in there, but let's just take a beat on this idea that maybe there's too much money and what should we do about it. Paige?
Sure. Hey, I'm Paige with Outlander. So yeah, there's a lot of money. I'd say I'm extremely excited because even the money that gets wasted is probably going to be consumed by other companies that kind of roll up that technology. But overall, the economics of war have changed. Our nation and all of our allies have to rearm. It is an imperative to rearm, and it's going to take a ton of capital. And this industry, the private sector, can move much faster than the Department of War. And we play a critical function, and all of you building technology play a critical function. The DoW has adjusted, and they've created surface area for founders and VCs to have an impact. But the venture industry still moves faster, I think, than anything that the government has ever created, and that is one of the greatest powers of our country. We have two things going for us: private capital that's creating next generation systems, and technology that's ultimately going to benefit citizens, right? These humanoid robots, these energy solutions are going to benefit mankind beyond just killing Russians and Chinese someday, if that ever happens. Second is that our youth, as well as all the veterans that spent 10, 20 years in combat, they are now out there building technology as well. So for all the people out there protesting in the streets with their stupid flags, we've got brilliant youth and veterans building solutions. And that's the two things our country has going for it: the best of the best building solutions, and private capital building solutions for the next capabilities that our country needs. So I'm a big fan of all this money coming in.
Kelly, how long have you been investing for? Since at least
2004.
2004?
I'm old.
Yes.
Kelly Perdew, Moonshot Capital.
Thanks, Kelly. With that benefit of hindsight, maybe any comparisons from other cycles in history to what's happening now? Obviously, be a different sector, but in terms of size of funds, capital flows.
Yeah, lots of examples of, some people argue bubble activity. My, military DNA, I'm really fired up and excited, similar to Paige, in terms of all the money, energy, intellectual capacity, focus, excitement on, outfitting the warfighter. It's imperative that we exceed and be able to, deploy a significant amount of force downrange and protect ourselves. So that side has me very excited. From a capital allocator, my job is to, from a fiduciary responsibility, return capital. And in the venture capital world, that's got to be a big multiple. And I think the amount of money that's come into this sector is pretty phenomenal. Yes, there's been growth in terms of all of our allies and us trying to refit, fight differently, invest in technologies. But everybody's familiar with the terminology of the valley of death, and it's a very long valley. I don't think that valley's gotten any shorter, even with all the efforts on the government side to make it shorter and on the money that's coming in. But it just got a lot wider. So there aren't like 5 drone companies, there are 5,000 drone companies. right, competing for the same amount of capital. And yes, there will be technologies that are deployable on the commercial side. We try to look for those technologies that do both, a Department of War solution and a commercial solution, because I need to return capital at a VC rate, not a private equity fund rate.
If I could just interject, Doug Philippone from Snowpoint. One of the things when I hear those numbers and say $50 billion, it's not like I'm challenging your reporting, but I would love to see the data. My hunch is that there's I would love to see the deals that money is going into, where people came up with that number.
It's pitch book data. It's not my number.
Yeah, and I'm not blaming you. I'm just saying that I bet you it's defense adjacent, defense super far adjacent, not so adjacent. I'd be surprised if that was.
That's true. We do get into a branding issue as well.
Yeah,
right?
and they're like,
and dual use as well.
Yeah, but it presupposes a big problem that I don't know if it's quite as exigent as it might seem. If you throw the $50 billion number around, that seems crazy. But when I see, it's definitely easier. So Snowpoint's been around for 5 years, and I could say that there's definitely a different tenor. Like when we started, it was sort of like defense was in the alcohol, tobacco, porn category.
Just 5 years ago.
Yeah, just 5 years ago. Yeah, and we're especially
where you're not investing.
Yeah, where people wouldn't want to give you money, right? Yeah, and so I'm definitely not investing in those things. But in Europe in particular, you couldn't even have a phone call in Europe. It was forget about it. And that's definitely changed. But there is money, but it's not, short of the really big firms piling up on companies too early and ruining the investability of the companies, that's a problem. Just because I don't know the exits will be there. That is a huge symptom of that problem. But I don't know if it's quite a $50 billion problem.
Yeah, and I want to talk about exits in a little bit, but Doug, you and I talked about the tailwinds that are there, and particularly from this administration, and we've all followed the memos from Hegseth, the acquisition reform, rescinding JSIDs, other efforts that seem to bode quite well for commercial companies, for startups. I'm curious, I want to hear your thoughts on the most significant tailwinds from this administration, and also if any of you have a portfolio company or know of a startup where those changes at the Pentagon have translated to dollars, a contract. I know it's not necessarily that clean, but where we can start to see that, some of these changes are trickling down through the system and converting into contracts for some of these companies. I don't know if that's happening yet, but maybe you guys have examples of that. Doug, do you want to start with what's going well?
Yeah, well, it's interesting, just for a little bit of context, I spent 17 years at Palantir before I became a venture capitalist, and it was hell. Everybody thinks of Palantir where they are now, and it's so easy at the top. But we had to really fight in tooth and nail to have hey, we have this cool software, we want to show it to somebody, they think it's cool, and you want to buy it, and then 30,000 people from the Pentagon come to tell you you can't do that. And there's this behemoth program that doesn't work, that's really expensive in the background that's blocking you. And just fighting through that tooth and nail, it was going to war all over again.
To be clear, Doug is the one responsible for Palantir suing the government and winning so that they had to use Palantir. So when he says fighting, he really means fighting.
Yeah, that was the last step. I literally talked to Alex Karp about it, where I was like, I don't know if we're going to win, but if we don't fight, we need to just shut down this part of the business. And luckily, they're crazy enough to trust me on that. But I think it was 3% chance of winning, and we won, so it was pretty cool. It's interesting, because I do get asked by members of Congress and the administration a lot, where they're like, what do you need? What do you need to help? And I'm like, in my adult life, I've never seen a better macro setup than we have right now. And all of the resistance, I don't know if there's any Booz Allen people in here, but it's the evil shadow of Booz Allen in the background eating up, a services company will take your market from you. And, now they're limping away, stock prices in half, and, every day you hear a new press announcement of a new agency canceling their contract with Booz. But
more than Booz, a lot of the consulting services
yeah,
across the board.
Boston Consulting, a whole bunch of those companies that were all, they call it butts and seats. But getting rid of that services contracting, national capital region competition for all of us who are building a real product, that's been the huge thing. It's what I always what I like to invest in, what I've seen is like if you can build a real prototype that you can have a competition and test something real, getting that set up, like that's a real thing. And you're seeing that now, I think, in prototype competitions where you can show up with a real thing. And that's like the fundamental change I've always asked for. Like, you don't have to give us fake, or I say fake, unfair contracts, or not asking for a sole source. It's just set up a prototype contract where we absorb the risk, we can show up with a real thing, and then win on the basis of that. And then I would invest with things where I think we're going to win. Like, that's as fair as you can ask. And I feel like that's finally set up. I think it will endure past the Trump administration. It feels like it's bipartisan. That feels good. But it's just starting. Like, all of that, government takes time. I feel like it's, when I talk to these people, I'm like, we got to do our thing. We have the entrepreneurs who want to do it. We have the money now, finally. And I think the contracts, I'm still skeptical of the Navy. Like, I don't know if they're a real customer quite yet. There's a lot of talk, but other than that, I feel like the setup is there, and it does. I am seeing that we are winning contracts. It feels good.
Your companies are. You feel like anyone else have a good example of?
I've got 3 recently announced ID.me. Anybody have ever heard of ID.me? 15 years on the board now, and I heard people talk earlier about how hard it is in the early years, and pivots, there are a lot of them. It started off as Troop Swap, became Troop ID, then ID.me. They recently announced a $1 billion VPA for the government, one gov contract, and that accelerated that discussion, and getting to a conclusion was like record timing because of their focus on anti-fraud, fighting nation-state actors, North Korea, China, different parts of Africa, full-blown attacks, 100% coming after U.S. citizens' money and accounts at federal and state levels. Signal, another security company that we funded, was acquired by CrowdStrike last month for $740 million, and they had significant traction and focus on what they were doing because of agentic, MCP, and the attention that's being paid and the speed with which the government's acting has accelerated significantly in the companies that I've seen in the last 2 to 3 years, for sure.
So some of the tailwinds that we're seeing, Steve Kiser, Veteran Ventures Capital, some of the tailwinds that we're seeing are more international and macro in nature. And so I'm an old guy too. So I remember this thing called the Soviet Union and the Cold War, and a guy by the name of Ronald Reagan. So, if you go back and look at spending trends around the world, you have to go all the way back to 1987 to get the same level of spending where you have Japan, Korea, Australia, the United States, and NATO all hitting the same crescendo of total dollars and percentage of their GDP in defense spending. All right, so that's 2 generations ago or whatnot. And those are geostrategic international macro trends that are not going away. Japan's, a lot of that is internal politics that changed there. A lot of that is because they live in a really enough neighborhood. And when you go talk to these countries and you go talk to the people that are, running their investment houses, and their indigenous defense industrial base is simply not large enough to absorb the defense spending that their government is putting out there. So the only place that they have to come to is the United States. And so what we're seeing in our portfolio companies is frankly quite a bit of international business, which we're pretty happy with. So we have allies and partners, around the world that are coming to the United States saying, we got a problem, and our DIB is not big enough to get after it. And I'm pretty sure that that's a structural change that's going to be, with us for 5 to 10 years. The world is not becoming a safer place.
Yeah, I mean, it's clearly working, and I think I started investing in defense about 10 years ago. Actually, after the Marine Corps, I built my first company in Iraq and had to go build contracts, and it was very different back then.
Can you tell them that story for just a second?
It's a long story.
It's too long, okay.
It's a long story.
We'll talk about it later.
I decided to drive into Iraq and build a startup. But contracting back then...
As one does.
Yeah. But contracting back then was fucked. I mean, my only edge was like, I'll just arbitrage fear and like go down range, and we'll just have to win contracts. But like now, I think roughly 80% of our startups that we've funded over the last 5 years, defense startups, have won contracts. And everyone's seeing this. It's like if you build something that they need, and I'm not talking about SIBRs, but talking about real contracts. We had a company we funded last year, 3 months in, had $25 million of real contracts, and our technology is being used in real-world systems today. We've got companies like Dunedyne building agentic warfare. We've got an ammunition factory that Devin's building. We've got laser weapons that Michael's building. And these guys are winning contracts. And the DoD has done two things. One, the primes are hiring founders, right? We've got startups selling in through the primes. And then the Department of War is actually giving them contracts. And this is a sea change in what I saw 20 years ago. So it's fertile. And the great thing is this administration is giving all of us the signal that we can put capital to work. Now, there's dumb deals being done, there's expensive deals being done, but in there, it is working. You can reliably fund great founders, building great solutions, and there is the real hope that we're going to have multi-billion-dollar outcomes.
Well, it all really sounds like rainbows and gumdrops, so that's great. But I do wonder about the appropriateness of venture capital as the structure historically as it has been of venture capital for this asset class. And I'll bring up a couple of things. Exits, I think, are inherently more challenging than many other sectors. Not as much M&A opportunity. We'll see kind of how the primes take advantage of this or not. There's going to be, there seems to be a SPAC trend brewing here, which, didn't turn out so great for the one in 2021, 2022, but we'll see how that goes. But there's limitations and challenges and exits that are particular to defense. In addition, you do have the challenge of basically having one customer. I know people argue with me that the U.S. military is not one customer. For the purpose of this conversation, it's a finite customer, right? So how many drone companies can you really have? So with that in mind, are there inherent limitations to the role venture capital can play in defense? And do you have to think about communicating differently with your LPs, setting different expectations, waiting a longer period of time as you're doing this?
I'd say it's critical. Look, think of the value of death, right? Venture capital is the only thing out there that sometimes is crazy enough to bet on technology and take it through the valley of death. Private equity wants to wait. They need proof points. And private equity does a great job. Debt can be a great job. But venture capital is like the only group of crazy people who can actually believe in the fantasy, see some of these indicators, and be willing to throw $3 million, and then $30 million, and then $300 million to work. So one, venture capital is essential. But you're asking a great question, which is, how do we make money in this crazy atmosphere? There are going to be a lot of losers. Right? We are in a high-risk game. And the point is, we only need a handful of these to actually win. We only need a handful of technologies to leapfrog the competition. So, yes, there's a lot of losers there. But the VCs that play this right and the founders that play this right are going to get rewarded. But it's a high-risk game, and there's going to be a lot of losers here.
I think you have to bifurcate this into the macro and micro. Is there a lot of money coming in? Absolutely. Is that a good thing? On the whole, it is. But when you look at the stuff that the military is buying, it's the same stuff that the private sector is buying as well. And so when you look at the aviation sector, all right, there were, I think, over 200 aircraft, civilian aircraft that weren't built because of COVID that they're all trying to catch up on now. Well, those are the same people that are building, collaborative combat aircraft. They're the same ones that are building the F-35 and the F-47, all that sort of stuff. When you're looking at rebuilding American shipbuilding, those are the same people that are laying kills for U.S. Navy platforms as well as the USVs. And so we're inherently dual use, and I think it's really hard to not be dual use because those two markets, those two client segments are sort of collapsing on one another. Now, getting back to the question of is it appropriate for VC to get into this? Again, going back to the Cold War, we had a domain superiority, in the 1950s all the way to today, and that we had a domain superiority in the undersea domain. Like, nobody can do submarine warfare like the United States can. Is anybody in here a submariner? Okay, I know Cameron was here earlier. He might be the only submariner, and he's got a great company. But you have U.S. submarines out there. They're the apex predators of the ocean. And we leveraged that domain expertise into 50, 60 years of deterrence against the Soviet Union. Okay, so what's our equivalent today? in my opinion, the depth of the U.S. private capital markets is a geostrategic asset that our adversaries simply do not have. I'm not talking about the Saudi PIF. I'm not talking about the Norwegian, sovereign wealth fund. I'm talking about private capital markets. Okay, so we may not ever be able to outplan the Chinese. We may not be able to put as much money to work as the Chinese Communist Party does, but we're going to out-entrepreneur you every single day. And when you have VCs up here that can move quickly, identify good opportunities, and get that capability into the hands of the warfighter for operational and joint test and evaluation that fast, that's a whole second U.S. defense budget that we can bring to bear. And that is absolutely a geostrategic advantage that we have over our adversaries.
I think it's important to stay disciplined. Weird coming from a military person, I know. But on your financials, you founders, you do have to do, course of action analysis across how you're managing your cap table when you're raising money. The same way that GPs do for investing. It's really important to start with the end in mind. What are the options and outcomes that are most likely? Work backwards from that, and that's how we have to make decisions on whether or not we're going to invest. So it's very possible that you've worked your company up to a point that it's really close to being successful, but it's not fundable. So you really have to understand what's driving the decisions that we're making, and make sure that you stay within those parameters for what you're doing, because you can box yourself into a corner by taking money at too high of a valuation early on because you've got some fervor and excitement about what you've built, because your next round, a down round's not good for anybody. Typically pretty painful.
So I think your question is spot on. At the end of the day, our sector has to make money or it's not going to exist. And so when I think about when I'm pitching LPs, or I think about my existing LP base, they absolutely expect real returns. When we were thinking about, I started the firm with my own money, so it was like my ass is on the line. So I was like, hey, is this a real thing? I know I want to do it. It's interesting. It's patriotic, but I want my money back too. And we did like a historic analysis of defense tech, government tech versus the S&P over times during downturns and during crashes and stuff. And statistically, it was a great hedge. It's like it really turned out great. And then the interesting thing happened is we were vintage 21, which is like a horrible year to get started, because we went through a really bad run for venture for a while, where you literally couldn't raise money at all for anything. And so the thesis, we're dual tech as well. So that's one way to get around this, is we're not doing bespoke missile parts. It has to have some broad applicability. Like, I have to be able to sell it to the government or the Defense Department, but it also has to have some applicability that some other place would want to buy it. That's a way that people understand. Some purists don't like that, but I don't think you can be super pure defense and you can't raise a lot of money. But anyway, the neat thing about this theorem, when we started the thing, we did the back testing to see if it was academically feasible, but then we saw it for real. And we went through the downturn in whatever it was, 23, 24, and all the companies stayed on track. They outperformed. They were able to like keep their business on track. And 5 years into it, when we're starting the harvesting period of Fund 1 and we're well into Fund 2, it's like 30%-ish IRR. We've had exits. We have IPOs. We'll probably have 3 or 4 exits this year. Like, right according to all the academic things that you expect, we're following, and it's becoming its own asset class in itself, which is pretty cool.
What's helping with the exits for those 3 companies in your portfolio? I mean, in this
Well, they're just, in a very academic sense, you go through, you're deploying and then harvesting. It's like the natural, they're like, finally, I'm in a deal with Kelly, we're like, oh my God, finally, we're about to get out of this sucker. But it's interesting. There is one salient point there. You have to be able, as a founder, and also as a venture capitalist, there are these macro things that happen every few years where you can be totally on track with your company, and you did everything you promised to do, and you can't raise money, and it just sucks. Anyway, it's a sad thing when that actually happens. But to be able to, and I've tried to learn, I tell my partner, I'm like, learn as much as possible and don't get killed. If you do that, it's like, keep going. And but part of it is like when you see these investments, you're like, man, this is going to take a lot of capital. Are you going to be the last person holding? That's the tricky part of the really, if you're an aircraft person, I don't know if I'm writing a lot of aircraft checks.
Learn as much as possible and don't get killed. That's good advice for life, right? So one thing I'm wondering about is the Trump administration's disposition and rhetoric with the primes has been very interesting. Threatening, the Pentagon has put primes on notice, going to review their performance, if not cutting contracts, threatening CEO pay and shareholder buybacks and all that kind of stuff. Letnick has talked about taking equity stakes in companies. They did that with part of L3 Harris's business. An interesting and certainly aggressive position that the administration has taken with the primes. I imagine startup entrepreneurs cheering this, but I'm wondering if you think this is good or bad for the defense tech startup ecosystem.
I'll step on that landmine. That falls under the concept of industrial policy. And 20 years ago, the government doesn't pick winners and losers. 20 years ago, industrial policy bad. And now, suddenly, industrial policy good. Wherever you set on that debate of whether the U.S. government should have an industrial policy, I think you can look at the performance of the primes and say it's not been good. And there's got to be consequences for bad performance. They underdeliver, they're late, they're overpriced, and there's got to be consequences for that. The government had its, was sort of handcuffed there for a while because of the great consolidation, back in the 70s and 80s. Who else could the government turn to? And so now you've got a very vibrant ecosystem of startups that are coming up with very novel warfighting ideas, or novel warfighting technologies, completely new concepts of operation that makes our dependence on the primes that much less. And there's policy actions that are coming in behind that, contracting modifications that are coming in behind that makes it easier for the government to buy from the startup community. And so if you've got an established legacy prime that's not performing, and you've got a vibrant startup community that can deliver an alternative message, it only makes sense for you to put the underperforming, asset class on notice. So I am not a favor from a philosophical perspective, just what is the role of the state, from a political philosophy perspective. I'm a purebred capitalist. That's why I'm in venture capital, right? So I am not a big fan of the government getting too much interference into the private sector. But as long as the government is the customer, then they kind of got a say in this, right? So anyway, that's my 2 cents.
All right. Anybody else?
Nobody else?
Nobody else wanted to take
I'll say
that?
the government had to step in, and the government had to scare the shit out of the primes, because we will not win if we depend on the primes to innovate in the time that we have. It will not happen. And it's not just the prime's fault. Like, the system is created for them to work in a certain way. We need both. We need startups, and we need primes, and we need to reindustrialize in our country. The administration, look at who they place in power. The appointees, right? They're picking weirdos, they're picking different people, they're picking VCs, founders, the undersecretaries of defense, the newest DARPA leader. So they're putting startups in power inside the government. They've focused on speed and lethality and delivering innovation. Primes are not going to go away. But the White House had to change the culture and make everyone realize you can buy from startups. That has not historically been true. We don't have a lot of time to innovate to this world of autonomous warfare, right? We have 5 years, a decade, but there's a massive evolution in the economics of war, and startups are about the only companies that can deliver a lot of that shift. And I also think we're going to see partnerships emerge. A lot of the primes have CVCs. They're out there investing and partnering with startups, right? And they can be very helpful with contracts, low rate initial production. Like, there is a great partnership that is there. So it's not just like them versus us. It was making room for startups to come in and actually innovate. And that was critical.
Go ahead, Doug. Yeah.
So, funny story, to kind of put this in light of how it's come full circle, but when, this might be 15 plus years ago, but I was in the E-wing in the Pentagon meeting with this is with Palantir. And so I was head of global defense at the time. And I was meeting with Army acquisition head, ASALT. And after being berated for not wearing a tie for like 30 minutes, they were really upset about that. He couldn't listen to a word. He was so upset about the tie. It's like an aside, but he didn't hear a word I said because he was so upset about the tie. And but then the only other thing he wanted me to do was, hey, you should just sell to General Dynamics. And it was just like, I'm not going to help you. We're going to run you out of town. You should just work with the primes. And and then a lot of times in the early days, it would the primes would buy the company to kill it. And so we're really it's one of those things where the pendulum has to swing really far to really undo those wrongs, cultural wrongs, for a really long time. And I think we talked about this over the phone, but it's I do feel uncomfortable with the degree of which the administration is going in terms of. I don't mind them bashing the primes. That's okay. But the idea of messing up the capitalist spirit of just the thing about capitalism is it gives you the right to fail, right? That's what we get a promise. But then if nobody fails, it's socialism, right? So it's having the government buy stakes in companies. It's tricky, except in really rare cases where there's not another market, where it is a very unique case. But in terms of just a macro specialist like an L3 or something that's weird.
It's tricky, and it's also it's king-making in a certain respect that I think would be a disadvantage to any competitor to L3, right? If the government. Thanks. So did you not wear a tie intentionally as a protest statement, or you just didn't even think of it?
No, it was kind of a funny. It's an early Palantir story, but it was the truth. I was at the time I was considered an adult in the company. I forget how old I was, 38 or something, or 37, and. Everyone was just really young. And so when they wore suits, they often didn't fit, and you just sort of looked like a clown. And these people were geniuses. And so this idea of and I was we have to wear fucking ties. And we're going in the E-Wing. And I sort of lost the battle because they were hey, we want to be mad geniuses. And so I was all right, we'll wear suits but not ties. And it was just, for that particular moment, then I had to learn this lesson. And so what I used to tell my guys afterwards, it was look, don't let your dress detract from your message. Unless you're really trying to make a statement, it's just fit in, so it doesn't, we didn't get to talk about anything I want to talk about because they were so pissed off about my tie. So in a way, it was just distracting. Just don't let your outfit distract from, you're not cool enough to oh, look what I'm wearing. It's stupid.
Another good life lesson, right?
Heather, can I add one more? So
yeah, go ahead, Kelly.
The speed of technology change is driving everything, right? Change the nature of warfare completely and how the technology works. And as an exigency, an existential element, we have to change the way we're doing business. So I don't care how it came across, it has to get shaken up. It's existential. So, oh no, of course he gets beat up a lot for message delivery. But the message, there's no other way to, I don't think there's any other way to upset that apple cart except go straight at it. So I'm supportive of the full-on shot across the bow warning.
But it also helps with your earlier question about exits. And so there's this there is a paradigm of when I think about the challenge of exits where it's sort of historically the primes, they wouldn't pay premium prices for startups because they're only getting 3% markups anyway, so it's they're not going to pay above that because they're not going to get valued for it, right? So it's you're kind of stuck in this range where you can do a deal with the primes and maybe it's 200 to 800 million or something like that. And if you're outside that range, you're just screwed. You don't have a buyer. And
they can't rationalize getting above their public multiple.
Yeah, and so, but what I do think that's changed now is that they're in a fight for survival in a sense. This is a thesis. It's not proven out yet, but I do believe that this is going to change in the next few years, where it's it will drive innovation, where they're not going to be able to innovate themselves, and it will drive some more M&A activity. I'm hopeful for it. But I do think at least there's one that I think, in the near future.
Take a minute on Europe. I can't read that sign, but I'm going to guess it says 10 minutes. Okay, thank you. We'll take a minute on Europe before we go to the audience questions. Has the push from the administration for NATO to pay more of its share of its own defense and the subsequent rearmament of Europe, of course, that's also due to Russia's aggression, Has that opened up a meaningful new set of customers for your companies?
Yes.
Yes.
Two different $500 million contracts,
500 million.
each country, two
With-
countries.
With whom?
Portfolio company. I can't say.
Yeah, I'm seeing the same thing.
Yeah, 100%.
Ukraine. I'm curious if you can talk a little bit about how you have viewed, how you have, as investors, have taken lessons from the innovation that the Ukrainians have demonstrated. Does that inform or instruct your thinking about the types of hardware and software, types of platforms, whether they're drones or otherwise, that you see value in, and how it has participated in your own portfolio companies' improvements and testing and iterations? One of you had several companies. Steve, was it you with that test in Ukraine? Can you talk for a minute about that?
Yeah, so that wasn't intentional. That just sort of happened that, a lot of our portfolio companies have deployed their capabilities in combat zones, so Middle East, Eastern Europe, Ukraine, a couple other places. And, you can take your technologies to exercises and do all the red flags that you want to do all the, valiant shields that you want to do. But until you actually are in combat with the real live adversary, that's not the pacing threat. China's obviously the pacing threat here. Russia's, as we're learning, because we're going to town collecting all kinds of Russian hardware, it's really not that good. Some of it's okay. But until you're actually in a really EW challenged environment, you don't know how stuff's going to work. And there's some major primes out there that I'm not going to name that are, some of them are public, some of them are private, all of them are very big, that have taken their stuff over there and it just doesn't work. And those are good lessons to learn over there before we have to learn them with our own soldiers, sailors, airmen and Marines. And so, any chance that you've got to make contacts with folks, if you've got something that's relevant to the battlefield, get it over there. The Ukrainians are doing this stuff for us. So don't, use that as a great proof point on whether or not your stuff works or not.
Well, I will come to you guys in just a second. I did want to sneak in one question on manufacturing. I know, Paige, you kind of jumped up and down when we talked about manufacturing earlier. Industrialization, I think that's driving, too, so much of the capital going into this space, this push for industrialization, and it goes beyond defense to rare earths and the like. So there's a lot to unpack there. But I actually want to start with the contrarian thing that you said, Steve, if you don't mind talking a little bit about that. And then if anyone else wants to have a final word on manufacturing, please do. You mentioned the potential effect on the sector when we have very large defense tech companies with large manufacturing spaces, a lot of manufacturing capacity that don't perform well, that go out of business, shrink, whatever it is, and you have excess capacity that is left over by whoever was there before, and the potentially detrimental effect that has on everybody. I thought that was really interesting that you brought that up, and maybe you can certainly explain that better than I did to the audience, how you're thinking about that risk.
Sure. If you look at the big primes, just to sort of set the example, if you look at Lockheed Martin up at Sunnyvale, that facility has got about a third of the number of people that it used to up there. It's almost a ghost town up there in some places. If you look at Space Park that Northrop Grumman is out and running out in El Segundo, they lost a pretty big classified satellite contract. They have empty space everywhere. Boeing, when the C-17 manufacturing wrapped up, all that empty space in Long Beach. And so if it can happen to those big companies that, are worth billions of dollars, it can certainly happen to a little company. So I think one of the things that we're seeing with all the flooding of VC into the defense space is that a lot of companies are not waiting on contracts to build their manufacturing. They're building their manufacturing as a differentiator to win the contracts. And so not all of those companies are going to win those contracts that they build factories for. And so you're going to see probably in the next couple, 3 years, a lot of those companies that built ahead of their contract wins, not be able to make it. And there's going to be some prime manufacturing space with, excellent manufacturing material that's going to be, available for a premium, or for pennies on the dollar.
Anyone else want the last word here before we go to the audience? Okay, great. Thank you, gentlemen. And we're ready for questions.
Hey, Kevin Horn. First off, I want to thank you guys for not mentioning McKinsey when you're talking about all the problems with the government. I was there for 7 years, so I feel like mission accomplished. You guys brought up, I think it was discussed. So one, I think the conversation was like super US centric. And the best part about defense is it's also a dual customer, and you get people who buy your product and the people who get to enjoy, I guess, the effects of it. And so when it comes to thinking about like a China or something, is a history, like we had an awesome run as Liberty ships and, you know, producing thousands of ships. China's going to crush us in something like that. They have thousands of drone companies and a thriving industry around agriculture, drones, and heavy lift. We don't have that. What do you guys see as markers of success? You know, obviously they have state-funded enterprises and stuff like that. We have private capital. Like, what lessons should we take from that as we think about growing and scaling dual-use technologies like drones in a similar way?
Well, for one thing, at least 2 of the funds up here are part of the SBIC CT program, where the federal government is providing debt leverage on top of the venture fund. It's called accrual debenture, and that increases the amount of dollars available to invest in critical technology areas and provides a levered return, assuming we're like, you know, top performing funds, which we are.
Awesome. Thanks.
How's it going, Aaron? Charles Masters Rodriguez, co-founder and CEO of Supply Veins. Given your military experience and everything you know about national security, but also about the venture capital world, I'm sure you see a lot of deal flow. As it pertains to the national security side, what are more of the companies that you would like to see, and what are some of the companies that you would not like to see?
Unmanned ground weapons. At the end of the day, you have to take land, right? You have to blow ship, you have to hold it. And we are in a world where we can actually replace a lot of our infantry and our ground support systems with unmanned. So like we are moving to fully autonomous, but the airspace is cluttered, right? There's great maritime. There's still room for maritime and subsurface, but I really want to see more unmanned ground. I want to see more, cheap space, kinetic, like we need more stuff in space. We need people to start thinking about deception. Like the battlefield is transparent now. So we need to think about strategic and tactical level mill deck. I haven't seen much of that out there, but those are some things I like.
Agree a lot with Paige. You know, if I see another quadcopter company, you know, I just don't know what I'm going to do. But apologies to any quadcopter companies that are out there. But we think that there's still room for the underwater drone UUVs. But what we're really looking for is the ability to command and control all of these dissimilar platforms in multi-domain environments. And so, you know, what a day would it be if, you know, a soldier could, you know, flip down his computer and get on ATAC and be able to send out a 1 on thousands command to UAVs, UGVs, USVs, and UUVs to operate in a cooperative swarm to go take an objective on a battlefield. And you know, right now we're kind of stuck with, you know, a lot of 1-on-1 or 1-on-5, you know, human to drone. And so, you know, we got to do a little bit better job on that. And so I think you are getting ready to send us a pitch deck, is based on your reaction there. And so that's what we would like to see.
Awesome, thanks.
Hi, my name is Ben Butterworth. I'm the CEO of FlightFrame, and I wanted to say that I experienced taking a capability overseas, spending months and millions to develop that capability just to find out it didn't work. That was a lived experience for me and was the actual source of my desire to do something about it. No such thing as an easy problem for us. It's in the aviation industry, dominated by primes, and I'm still doing it. It's going to be a hard one. But as I am talking to people who are, my motivation is, you know, for national security, but venture capital, you got to be able to come back and say this is about dollars and cents and making money. It can't just be altruistic. So as I'm talking to investors and ambushing you guys later, how much do I need, or are you guys weighing the strategic impacts of what we're building versus the dollars and cents? Can I sell this to my LPs?
Well, I would certainly start with the problem. Like, is this actually a problem that needs to be solved? a lot of times it's just sort of like engineering excess, where it's like, hey, I'm going to get a better wing design or something. And it's just like, that's not really that important of a problem. And then also just really understanding how, on the market, on the government side, we always make fun of like, hey, do market research, figure out what's out there. But also on the entrepreneur side, I'll see a lot of folks where they'll come in and pitch an idea and they'll be like, well, it's like this false signal where the government gave them money and they think that means something. You're like, well, that's just because that dude didn't know that 5 feet away somebody else was giving somebody else money for the same thing, right? It's like the government's a big place, the military's a big place, and they don't always know what's going on. And so you have to really do the market research of like, is this an actual problem? I mean, I've kind of built, my firm is built around my life journey of like understanding the intersection of technology and then my life journey as a commander of the military of like, is this a real problem that like either I saw or I can call a buddy who was a commander as well? Is this still a problem? What are the existing systems? How are they currently solving this problem? And really understanding that deeply, and then get to the point of like, why isn't this solved? And then can I make money on it? And it's like going through that cycle I think is probably the healthiest, but it's actually solving like a hard problem. Like, does anybody care about this? Like that's at the core of like building software too, is like, who cares about this? Like, why are we building this? Does Corporal Smith think so? Or like, is actually anybody give you money for this? Going through that drill, I would recommend is like the most fruitful way. I don't think there's, other than that, I don't know if.
Yeah, I don't think there's a right answer. The answer is actually yes. You have to show all of it. All of us have a ridiculous amount of deal flow, meaning like for our last fund, 5,019 deals, funded 16. So you have to be compelling. You have to answer like, why is it driving you? Why are you uniquely able to do it? Obviously what the customer really needs, what's the real problem that's being solved? And it's got to make sense, like I said, financially across all the different potential outcomes. Like there has to be an opportunity for me to get multiples on fund return, right? Because it's if you're successful at everything, and you're going to give me $10 million back, and I gave you $3 million, we don't have anything to talk about, right? So there has to be the opportunity for that spike, in addition to like we're all here as military veterans, so we love and want to help and invest in things that help protect the country.
And sometimes it'll take more capital. If you think about like if you really have a unique problem that you're solving, where it's like it's not an articulated need from the department, and you're really doing something unique, you have to both solve that on a technical problem, and then you have to pitch the customer that they actually need it, and then we have to be able to give you enough money to survive until we can create the funding.
And you got to lobby Congress, and you got. I mean, the list is endless when you're doing government.
You're talking 3 years, and so you have to think about like, okay, how, and then you're like, oh man, that problem might be too hard. Move on. But if you can survive, you really make money.
So venture capital is a geostrategic asset in the United States like nowhere else in the world. With that being said, what heuristics do you use in venture capital to assess when you're being pitched what is actually tactically and doctrinally relevant for the fights of tomorrow, vice to where the flows of capital are going, which seemingly seems to be for the fights of yesterday?
I think when you sit down and have a conversation with us, we want to understand your insight. And that's one of the big things I want to understand is, what do you think is happening in the future? Explain your thinking to me. Tell me your insight. And that's one piece of it. But, look, the battlefield's changing.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of political, technical, social, like there's a lot changing out there. So tell us, like, what's happening? Like Michael came to me in Detroit. He's like, hey, there's a lot of drones. We need to blow them up. We can't just use bullets. Let's use lasers. I was like, that's a good idea. Let's build laser weapons. I like it.
Yeah, and just
it's simple.
to
It's
clarify,
like,
go ahead.
Like,
Until the FAA and the Pentagon and the White House don't coordinate, then it's not so great.
they don't care. They'll be fine.
In case anyone read the news today.
Just to clarify, what everybody's doing is absolutely incredible, but just as you said, the battle space is shifting, and there is a lot of momentum in the high-end fight, especially with our near-peer threats. So it was just a question on how you guys assess that, but you definitely answered.
Well, the other piece is, and especially for the four of us, I mean, there are a lot of people that now do dual-use investing because they go and hire an admiral, retired admiral or general, and they have no idea, literally no idea what they're doing in terms of all the way through the cycle. Each of us has dozens, hundreds of direct points of contact into special operators, into the commanders, into the actual customer. So I'm not going to invest, and you're telling me this is fantastic, and all the forward special forces operators are going to use it without going and talking to them about your solution. So it's a full circle. Like, yes, understanding your customer. We check to know if you understand your customer. We go actually talk to them because we have direct relationships with all of them.
Perfect. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Rachel. I'm a founder, but I'm also actually an Army acquisitions officer, and kind of been researching this space in grad school in the Valley of Death and then teaching econ at West Point. And so a lot of it has been dominated by defense tech. But I did have a question more so going back to the manufacturing piece of so basically of the, not defense tech, but the unsexy parts of the capital of organic industrial base, of manufacturing of critical minerals. I was curious about how we can better frame that relationship in terms of a capital structure, but also was very curious just in general from a overall standpoint of the relationship around technology, because from my end, which I know is a little bit more of an outlier, there's still a bit of skepticism of outsourcing all completely to small businesses because of the sustainability of its I guess just in general, right, of its capital, of its sort of a production contract. You get the RDT&E, and then suddenly you basically have no other choice but the primes to scale. And so I was kind of curious about any policy or new ways to approach that discussion around technology and leasing IPs, TDPs, or something along those lines where it's not so contentious.
I don't know, that was a lot.
Sorry.
I felt like you asked 10 questions. Frame your most important one. I mean, look, it's a contentious issue when you're working with acquisition, and you're giving me nightmares a little bit in some of the things you brought up of just sort of like, what IP do we own? How can I get a return? Are we solving a real problem? If it's like, if we're talking about rare earths, start thinking about like, what's a multiple on a mine? I don't know. I get pitched rare earth stuff all the time. Almost bought a copper mine.
Copper mine.
It's crazy. I mean, it's just basically like, you got to imagine being in our seat. We're getting 100 pitches a week of just the most random stuff ever, and we have to filter through it based off of our life journey and how much we believe you and your background. And it's like, okay, could I make sense of this? Do I know how to sell it? Could I make a return? And you're trying to filter through all that noise really quickly.
And can you convince the next lead of the round of financing that it should get funded?
Who's the buyer of this, right? Can you conceivably actually produce this thing? What's the business model of it? Who's going to buy it? Is it actually going to work? What's the competition? There's a lot that goes into it. And so, I mean, we're all a little bit crazy to be in this field for sure, but it's I don't know if there's a real right answer. And part of it is, there is one good change is that, like Kelly said, we're in this program with the Pentagon, with this Office of Strategic Capital. I remember when we went through the process, we got to the end of it, and I had this aha moment where...
now you're giving me nightmares.
Yeah, where they're like, hey, we actually get to call you? There's this like completely ridiculous thing about the military where they're not allowed to talk to the private sector for some reason. And I don't know why, like for fear of corruption, or I don't know what it is, but it's stupid. And the ability to call a contracting officer, to call an acquisition people, like, who cares about this? Can you please just be honest with me? And have that dialogue back and forth where you can filter out, where the other gentleman said, like, how do you get your ideas, or how do you know what the future of war is? Like, we're going to make our best guess based off our life journey, and then you have to be a visionary to convince us that your idea is right as well, and then we check with the buyer, or if we have to, get a sledgehammer and force a creation of the market, that's the third way. All of those are the things that we go through all the way. There's no magic answer. I don't know if that's answered any of your questions.
I think we would get a low score on her test.
Hey guys, thanks for this super insightful panel. I'm Abi. I'm building an AI wargaming platform. We simulate adversaries using large language models. This question might mostly be for Doug, but I'm curious for everyone too. Like, I'm pretty sure Palantir started by selling to the CIA, not the military. Have you seen, first of all, how did you all think about that as a strategy? And have you seen any other companies, early stage, taking that kind of strategy for go-to-market?
So I started the defense business, so I can say that that is true, that we did sell to the intelligence community first. And then
Did help catch a Somerville out of true or false?
I don't know. Yeah, that was it. Whatever, doesn't matter. I wouldn't really recommend it. There's like one of these, in terms of your question about selling to the intelligence community first and the defense community. I mean, look, I'm very biased, so put that out there front. The challenge that I saw, and there are specialists in this field, it's just not me, but it's like the pure cyber guys, that's an example of this that would be a corollary of the intelligence community, is there's this big black fence, and the big black fence has no transparency through it. And so there's like a lot of like, that's where the Booz Allen people live, behind that fence. And so if you have a product and then, if you go to the agency, there's like 7 badges you got to get and nobody can go talk about anything. It's very cumbersome. And then there's also like, there's no referenceability. I remember getting really excited about one of our early deals which was one of the special mission units, and I was so excited because it was I thought it was going to be this reference, and we couldn't ever talk about it, and they never talked about it. So it didn't help us at all. So from a business perspective, going in the intelligence community or NSA, it's tough to have broad. You can get expertise, you can definitely get money, depending on the scale you want to do, you can have a great business, so I don't want to deter that entrepreneurship, but it's like if you were trying to go broad and wide, it's hard to reference, and it's hard because you just can't talk about it. And then you can have barriers to entry that you don't know exist.
Why did Palantir do that?
Well, it's part of the history of the company. It's like they started the company around 9/11, and it was like, hey, the intelligence communities they were solving a hard problem that they saw. That is like, law enforcement and the intelligence communities had the riddles to the problem, and they could not talk. And when they started it, they're like, okay, we're going to go start at these agencies where that problem existed, and that problem was not with the Department of Defense. But then when they wanted to be a real business, they're like, we have to go there.
Thanks.
Us too?
Hey guys, Chris Swanson with Triple Point Capital. I think it's fair to say that the actions of the Trump administration was unprecedented for unlocking innovation within defense procurement, defense investing, and just the crop of new technologies that we see for the United States. Do you worry about the actions of a future administration that might undo a lot of the work that the Trump administration has done to unlock that access? And how do you think about continuing administrations from here?
I'll limp into this one. So I worry about every administration change. When some of the newer GPs in the industry are talking about, hey, what are some learnings that, what do I need to worry about investing in companies that sell to the government? And I say all the time, like, I literally have never been in a single sales meeting where the company that's selling to the government has a surprise to the positive during the meeting. Oh, we found an extra $10 million contract. Oh, there's another $100 million this quarter. It's like, it's pushed to next month. That never happens. It's pushed to the next cycle. It might be pushed to the next administration. So it's also, if you're selling to Department of War and any command structure, they rotate out of their jobs every few years. So, like, first question, well, how much more time in the seat does the decision maker have? Because the person coming in wants to change the way things look and pick their own programs. It's not for the faint of heart leading into this stuff. So, yes, I worry a lot about that. I'm happy we are where we are right now, and I worry about that.
But the macro thing will happen is everybody in this room, including us and you all, if we prove that this system works and you actually make a better mousetrap and we actually sell it and we can save money for the taxpayers and give a better widget to the warfighters, we'll prove the thesis. And we have between 3 and 12 years to do that, right? And so, and if not, what they're going to say is, hey, see, this is why we had those rules. Like that'll be what happened. But if we actually do our job and prove it, we just have to prove it. That's all. And then, but it is very bipartisan right now. I think that there's broad support for everything that's happening. But as soon as something goes wrong or we don't deliver or there's some failure or whatever, then it will go back to the old way. They're like, this is why we need rules.
I'd say it depends. So some things like autonomous warfare are inevitable. Doesn't matter, Republican, Democrat, like robots are going to war. Some things I care about are like, I was talking to someone who was a brilliant Marine doing SMRs for defense. And I think that's a really good idea, but I do wonder, like, could that be impacted by the administration? So some cases I'm like, yes, I worry, will an administration change something? But there's some technology that is inevitable, whether it's left or right, it's inevitability, it's gonna happen.
Yeah, I guess I would push back on the premise of your question a little bit, because what is innovation, right? If you look at the R&D budgets, prior to this administration were actually larger than the R&D budgets in this administration. Why is that? It's because that money is being moved to procurement, restocking the empty shelves and stuff like that. If you look at probably the most famous defense innovation thing, DARPA. DARPA is smaller today with a smaller workforce doing fewer projects today than it was 2 years ago. If you look at the number of innovative organizations, I think correctly that hairball has been cleaned up a little bit, but there's fewer of them. And so I'm not sure that what you said is entirely capturing everything. This administration certainly has been the most vocal about it and has certainly done a lot of extraordinarily good policies about it. I love, the whole thing about, hey, we're going to have a patent vacation, and I mean, that should be somebody's field day. There should be people in there like, Scrooge McDuck coming down the slide, going through patents, looking at stuff. When I brought this up to DARPA several years ago, I'm like, guys, why don't you guys open up your toy box to, to the private sector? And it was shocking to me that DARPA said, we don't know what we have. They absolutely said that we don't know what IP we have. We don't know what, there's no inventory of this. So something like that would be really, really good. But going back to what Kelly said, there's change everywhere all the time. And there's going to be change after this administration. Some of the things are going to be kept. Some of the things are going to be undone. So I'm not sure that this is a unique moment in history that if we don't preserve this, it's like it's the end of the world. So you just got to surf the waves, and hope not to get wiped out.
Last word, sir.
Tim asked me twice to be quick. So I'm in public safety. My question is very specific because you guys are in national security and talk mostly about defense. But I think that the most problem is within, with all the shootings in schools and places of worship. Our children are at stake and innocents are at stake. Where government is getting involved, because I see it as a post-effect and pre-effects and liability things. How would you see that government will overtake the government's state level to really interject national security in terms of these incidents?
I don't know that there'll be active government activity to do it. I know that I've seen dozens of pitches from companies that have what you've just described, like protection in schools and public places, as their commercial solution for the dual use element, whether it's fast response times on drones for identifying shooters or weapons and then sending the signal out so that your response time drops from 30 minutes to 3 minutes, to like, I think one of Brett Adcock, who runs Figure's additional businesses, is something that can identify weapon systems on school grounds. So I think a byproduct, and I think Paige mentioned it earlier, all the spend in the defense sector is that there are a lot of ancillary solutions that come out of it that have applications in the commercial sector. And since a lot of it's about identifying and protecting against weapons, that can be useful for the commercial sector.
Yeah, I think security is a big theme for us because every year individual lethality goes up dramatically. Look at, Devin here, they do 3D printed warheads and weapons, and when I funded him, I realized the next school shooting could be actually indirect fire. It could be a mortar team. It could be a crazy kid that 3D prints a mortar system and puts, a 60 mic bike on a school, which is not insane. I mean, it's insane, but that's very feasible in the next couple of years. So individual lethality is going up, and you're always going to have crazy fuckers, right? That's two truths. So we do invest in security technology. It is inevitable that crazy people will do more damage individually. And I think the answer, one big answer is probably, it's not full autonomy, but it's probably telepresence, security. And there are a lot of startups working on this, whether it's drones or robots or turrets, but I think we're going to have to accept telepresence and eventually autonomous security in our streets and our schools to deal with that threat.
I think, if you look at the broader arc of history, defense tech has led the way on a lot of things like, the internet, solar panels, the microwave, that sort of stuff, that is eventually adopted across broad swaths of the economy. Law and order is one of those things. And so, if you look at, automatic target recognition software, there's all kinds of building security devices that put little bounding boxes around what looks like weapons. So you can screen a lot more people, at mass gatherings, like stadiums and stuff like that. A lot of that technology is in the background, so you don't necessarily see it. But you're going to see more and more adoption of technology developed on the battlefield by law and order, first responders folks. Will that address, the pandemic of shooting that we have here in the United States? It'll help in some ways, I think, but I think that would be, one angle to look at this.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time. Thank you, gentlemen.
Really appreciate Heather and gentlemen for that enlightening discussion. We, as a group, invest in veterans. We, as a group, invest in defense tech. A lot of these gentlemen have been investing in defense and veterans for years, mentors, leaders. So let's give them another round of applause. Thank you all, gentlemen.
Thanks, Tim.